To get the most out of this video, listen to the introduction to understand what is going to happen astrologically this week and when it will occur. Then use the timestamps in the description box or comments section below to go to your sun, moon, and rising signs to see how things will generally affect you. This is a general read of the astrological energies that will be playing out this week. For a specific assessment of how the planetary energies will affect you personally, I would suggest getting a reading with a professional astrologer. You can do so with me through the Guiding Star Astrology website. If you're new to astrology, you are so welcome on this platform. If you would like to learn to read your own astrology chart, you can do a short, fun course with me for $35 Australian. The link is in the description below. Thank you to all my YouTube subscribers and my Patreon family members. Without you, this video and its message would not be possible. Hello, I'm Kesenya, and welcome to this series that I've been preparing for you all about Neptune and Neptune's transits through every house in the horoscope and how it will affect your life. Now, I've been wanting to do this series for quite some time now. However, I decided I'd wait until Neptune had crossed my ascendant and my first house lord. In doing so, there's a strategy behind this. I wanted to see how Neptune would play out in my life on those very significant and key points in my chart. Astrology is 50% reading books and doing courses and getting mentors and teachers, and the other 50% is observation and experience of the planets in your life. So the older you get, the more wisdom, the more knowledge that you will have about how planets impact us. So now that I've gone through those particular transits of Neptune in my first house, I feel that I'm ready to talk more in depth about this very watery planet. So let's start by having a look at what Neptune is all about astronomically. So Neptune comes after Uranus in the order of the planets. We have Mercury, Venus, the Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, boom, Neptune. Second to last of the key players in astrology. Pluto is still considered to be a planet of influence in astrological circles, and therefore Neptune is the second last. Now, when Neptune was discovered, it wasn't through observation. They didn't sort of spot Neptune in the sky and go, aha, there it is, because you actually need a telescope to see Neptune. It's not something you can observe with the naked eye. And so Neptune was discovered through mathematics. Basically, the astrologers of the time when Neptune was discovered, and we're going to talk about that when Neptune was discovered in just a minute, but the astrologers of the time were observing Uranus, and they had mathematically predicted where Uranus was going to go according to all their observations, and then Uranus did his usual quirky thing and did not follow the predicted orbit. And so from that, they were able to calculate that there must be a planet further out that's pulling on Neptune, and its gravitational force has caused it to move in a different way than we expected or anticipated. And so because of their mathematical calculations, they began to look for another planet beyond Uranus. And voila, we have Neptune. Now, what is very interesting, and this is quite telling about the character of Neptune actually as well, what is very interesting is that Galileo had observed Neptune back in 1612. He didn't realize that Neptune was a planet. I don't know what he thought it was, but he didn't sort of put two and two together and think, there's another planet out there. So Galileo had observed Neptune, and this was a whole 234 years before the discovery of Neptune. Now, why I say this correlates to sort of the ambiguous nature of Neptune is that he's a bit slippery as a planet. It's hard to sort of pin down. So here was Galileo observing Neptune, not realizing what he was, not sort of seeing it for what it was, basically sort of under an illusion that Neptune was something else. That is a very Neptunian quality, which we'll talk about very soon. But 234 years later, we had the discovery of Neptune in the real through that mathematical observation that I was talking about. This was in 1846. Now, most people know that when we discover new planets, there is often a rise in consciousness or an increase in conscious awareness in humanity on the Earth at the time of the discovery of a new planet. For example, when Uranus was discovered, we had a number of revolutions occurring around the world. What does Uranus correlate to? It correlates to freedom, liberation, equality, and equal distribution of resources. And what were these revolutions about all around the world? Well, namely, the French Revolution was occurring when Uranus was discovered. And that was about no more let them eat cake kind of stuff, no more of the aristocracy living in opulent luxury beyond compare, while the poor people of the land went hungry and could barely clothe and feed themselves. And of course, Uranus, sorry to diverge off Neptune, but Uranus is all about those things, equality. And so the conscious awareness of the planet had reached a point where it was like, no, now hang on, we're not going to take this inequality anymore. We want things to be fairer. We want things to be more even. And lo and behold, at the discovery of Uranus, which rules those things, the consciousness was ripe and ready to embrace that as part of its awareness. Now, the same occurs with Neptune, who was discovered a little while after, as I said, in 1846. So what was the expansion of consciousness that occurred at the time Neptune was discovered? Well, we had an invention of photography that had occurred sort of 20 years before. Now, when we're talking about these big planetary discoveries, this is no mediocre discovery. This is really kick-ass stuff. And so we look at the surrounding sort of, 20, 30 years as an era of the discovery of Neptune. Keep in mind, when I'm talking about this, that up until the discovery of Uranus in the late 1700s, there had the existence of planets beyond what you could see with the naked eye was not known, was not proven. And so for thousands of years, the consciousness of humanity had been in a state where it was only aware of what it could see, touch, taste, hear, and smell. In the real, in the earthly dimension. If you couldn't see beyond Saturn, then there were no planets beyond Saturn. And then all of a sudden, at the discovery of Uranus, boom, we have an awareness of more. And so Uranus was discovered, and then Neptune was discovered. And so the surrounding sort of 30 odd years in the vicinity of 1846 when Neptune was discovered are Neptunian times. And so we look at what was unfolding in consciousness then. And as I've just said a moment ago, photography. Photography was discovered. Neptune rules photography. Motion pictures were discovered 30 years or so after the discovery of Neptune. And Neptune rules motion pictures. The spiritualist movements were unfolding around the world. We started to find people who were interested in sort of hypnosis and mesmerism, people who would be, looking at channeling, people who wanted to conduct seances. These sorts of things started to come into vogue as parlor games, as did the tarot card readings and even astrological readings as sort of, like I said, parlor games, entertainment at fancy people's dinner parties and so on. That was the very glamorous side of Neptunian times, using those spiritualist things as entertainments for glamorous people. Plastics were discovered around this time. Braille for the blind, writing for the blind. Antiseptics. Pasteurization was discovered and started to be used. And these are just a few of the advancements that occurred in society around the time that Neptune was discovered. We also had cultural movements like Romanticism, the poets, Byron and Shelley around this time as well. We had, alongside Byron and Shelley, we had things like the Frankenstein novel or the Dracula novel, which is a very interesting thing. Impressionism was also the painting style en vogue around this era of history. And we also had the Communist Manifesto that was written. Now, some people, if you're not familiar with politics, the name communism can conjure up all sorts of negative imagery in your head. But the idea behind communism was a bit like Uranus in that it was about equality and compassion to everybody. So these are combinations of both Uranian themes, which is equality, and sort of an even playing field for everybody. And also Neptune, which is highly compassionate, wanting everybody to get an opportunity. And of course, Neptune, for those who we haven't got to this point yet, but Neptune rules idealism as well. So the ideal of the Communist Manifesto was present in these Neptunian times as well. Whether it actually functioned and worked was another matter, but the ideal was there. A utopian vision for society is what Neptune is all about, and so there's no surprise that we had movements in that direction towards that ideal at this time. Back to the astronomy, Neptune is a planet that's made up of liquid and ice. And it's also full of different gases as well. So it's quite a combination, Neptune, of many things. But it's very similar in its size and its structure to its nearest planet, which is Uranus. They're almost twin-like in many senses, even though they function very differently astrologically. Like Uranus, Neptune is actually circled by some very faint rings of dust. Uranus's rings are more visible, but Neptune does have rings as well, very light, very faint rings around Neptune. If you've seen images of Neptune that were taken, I think it was by the Voyager space probe, I may be wrong there, but if memory serves me, I think it was Voyager that took images of Neptune, you'll know that it's this beautiful, serene, blue-looking planet that has some wafting sort of white, they look like clouds, around it occasionally. And despite its very serene-looking surface, it is quite a wild planet underneath. So again, that illusionary factor there. On the surface, it looks like it's cool, calm, collected, and underneath, it's not what it seems. On Neptune, winds whip around the planet at, I have to read this, 2,100 kilometers an hour, and they're furious winds. Not only that, Neptune takes only 16 hours to do a rotation. It's heaps bigger than Earth, Neptune, lots bigger than Earth. And we take 24 hours as an Earth to rotate. But if you're a monstrous sized planet and you're spinning, doing a circuit of 16 hours, then the gravitational pull of Neptune becomes pretty phenomenal, despite the fact that you're mostly made up of gas. So this momentum of the gravitational force from the spin and the winds that whip around Neptune sort of whips up all the ice, methane, hydrogen, helium, and ammonia. Had to read that list to make sure I got the chemicals right. Whips it all up into a big slushy mess. So it's not this pure ethereal kind of atmosphere or body of Neptune. It's actually a bit of a slushy, wild mess when you get down to it. Now, some scientists, and this is very interesting, some scientists have hypothesized, just through their calculations and observations, that the core of Neptune, which is burning iron, very fiery, very hot core, they have hypothesized that there is a layer of diamond, liquid diamond, that encircles the core of Neptune. Now, just how they've reached that conclusion, don't ask me, but it is there in scientific journals that this is a hypothesis that could prove true and correct. Now, this iron core that's burning hot, white hot iron core, is actually bigger than the Earth. So the core, the solid mass, if you like, of Neptune is larger than the Earth, and it burns at about, or its temperature is about 5,000 degrees Celsius. So it's incredibly hot, even though it's so far from the sun and distant from the sun's rays, which is usually where heat comes from in the solar system. This Neptune has its own heat source through this burning iron core. So you're getting the picture? We have this impression of Neptune, of serenity on the outside astronomically, but not quite what it seems deep down. And again, we'll see that represented when we start talking about the astrology of Neptune and how it impacts us, and therefore how it's going to impact us when it travels through each house. We also can see that it is a very fluid type planet. It's, slushy, slippery, and of course Neptune rules the watery depths of the ocean, if you're familiar with mythology and the title of Neptune. We'll talk about that in just a second as well. I love the analogy that we're seeing here of this watery fluid planet, but it has a solidness at the core and a preciousness, the liquid diamond. There's something precious at the core of Neptune. Now, Neptune, as we've already stated, is invisible. You cannot see Neptune out on a fine stargazing night. You will always need a telescope to see Neptune. And as the old Hermetic principle goes, as above, so below. The way things appear in the sky from our vantage point on Earth is exactly how they will play out and be represented and reflected in our lives on the planet. What does that mean? Well, it means that the planets we can see with the naked eye, the visible planets, in astrology, they correlate and connect to what we experience visibly, tangibly, experientially on the Earth. Our touch, taste, sight, sound, and smell. You know, the physical things of the experience of being a body incarnate on the Earth connect to visible planets and what they rule. When you get to Neptune, actually when you get to Uranus, Neptune and Pluto, they're all invisible without a telescope, and therefore they connect to the inner realm of the psyche, what motivates us unconsciously, you know, our behavioral patterns, our things we can't help about ourselves, you know, our deep psychological wounds and our karmas that we carry with us at the core of our self, at our soul level. They correspond to these invisible planets because as above, so below. We can't see them, therefore it's like the part of the iceberg that sits underneath the water. You can't see it, but it's still there packing a whopping punch, especially if you happen to be on the Titanic. So Neptune has at least 14 moons that circle it. It has a greater and denser gravity than the Earth. So if you're standing on Neptune, you will weigh a lot more than you do on the Earth. And it takes longer than one lifetime for Neptune to circle the sun. It takes 165 years. So in your lifetime, you will never see Neptune return to its natal place in your astrological chart. You just won't live that long, at least not in this day and age as I'm recording this video. Who knows what science might do in the future, but right now you won't live to be 165 and see Neptune come back to its natal position. Let's explore Neptune mythologically now. Well, Neptune is the name of the Roman god of the sea. Not only the sea though, in the oceans, but also of fresh water. Neptune was the Roman god of fresh water as well. And we often see Neptune in mythological pictorial representation with his trident. And of course, what is the symbol of Neptune astrologically? It's a trident. So there we go. There's so much correlation between the mythologies and what plays out in the skies again here. So again, there's no coincidences that when the astronomers discovered Neptune, they didn't know that it was made mostly of liquid and gas. They didn't know it was mostly a fluid planet. But lo and behold, here we are. They gave it the name Neptune, king of the oceans, and Neptune is quite an oceanic planet with its liquid mass. Once again, this is showing us how the conscious awareness works, even in unconscious ways. Now, a little bit more about Neptune mythologically was that he was the son of the Titan god Saturn. Now, along with Neptune, there was Jupiter and there was Pluto that were the sons of Saturn. And Jupiter, Neptune, Pluto didn't really get along with Saturn very well. If you're familiar with the mythology of Saturn and Jupiter, you'll know that the mother of Jupiter hid him away because Saturn had a habit of eating his children lest they rise up against him and take over. So theoretically, in the mythology, Neptune and Pluto were gobbled up by their father Saturn. But then along came Jupiter when he was all grown up to the rescue, and Saturn regurgitated his offspring, Neptune and Pluto. There were others as well, but the main ones were Neptune and Pluto, the brothers of Jupiter. And together, Jupiter, Neptune and Pluto overthrew their father Saturn, and Jupiter became king of the gods. And we had the reign of the Olympian gods from that point on, which include Neptune and Pluto. So Jupiter, Neptune, and Pluto are the Olympian gods. Saturn was the Titan god. And Uranus, who was the father of Saturn, just to confuse matters even further, was not a Titan and not an Olympian. He was sort of one of the forefathers of them all. In ancient Greece and Rome, they celebrated the role of water in their lives, and they had a festival to celebrate this, and it was known as Neptunalia. There was also another festival that occurred at the similar time called Ferinalia. I won't go into the mythology of that name, but they were both celebrated around the same time. So July 23rd and July 25th, the role of water and the preciousness of water in life was celebrated with these festivals. So Neptunalia, it was a time of honoring the god Neptune and its watery association. So let's take a peek at the astrology of Neptune. I'm going to tell you all about Neptune astrologically. What is Neptune about? Well, as we've already come across, Neptune is about illusion, seeing something and actually realizing it's something else. It's not what it seems. So that can be a number of things can be displayed that way. Glamour is ruled by Neptune, because if you're glamorous, you've got amazing makeup and hair and beautiful, shimmering, gorgeous clothes and stuff. You look very glamorous, but is that who you really are? When you wake up in bed in the morning, and your hair's a tousled mess and you haven't got makeup on and you're wearing your baggy old t-shirt, you might not look glamorous. So glamour is ruled by Neptune because it's part of that deception, if you like, but not a bad deception. It's just a deception. It's not what it seems. Neptune, in that sense, rules glamour. Neptune, as we've already discussed, rules a desire to return to utopia, to achieve utopia, to create heaven on earth, so to speak. So that can be a very positive thing if we're wanting to make the world a better place. And Neptune is also quite a compassionate planet. There is a lot of unconditional love that goes along with Neptune, brotherly love, the idea of anyone can be saved from their horrible life or, their difficulties or their own ill choices in life. Neptune has this sort of unconditional love. Some might refer to that as this redeemer quality about it. And Neptune can be connected to miracles as well, because if somebody is raised up from the muck and mire into a wonderful life, well, that is often seen as a miracle. And that transformation that occurs is a very Neptunian associated thing in astrology. Part of this desire for utopia can actually have connections to a longing to escape the horror and the harshness of earthly reality. And those of us who are very Neptunian, who have a strong Neptune in our chart, or even a strong 12th house or a strong Pisces, will know what this is all about. The wanting to escape from earth and earth realities because they're too hard to bear. They're fearful. Earth is a fearful place for these highly sensitive Neptunian, Piscean, 12th house souls, and it's almost too hard. So Neptune is also associated with tremendous longing to tap out, to escape, a longing to go to heaven. Now, you'll see a lot of religious groups, fanatical religious groups going down this road where it doesn't matter what I endure in this lifetime, I will be rewarded when I go to heaven. And that's all they're living for. They don't even engage in earthly reality and earthly life because it's only about heaven and getting to heaven after this horrible life is over. That's a Neptunian thing. Also, Neptune has this idea about it of wanting to return to the watery depths, i.e. the womb, being in the embryonic fluid, being safe and secure, not having to sort of struggle and make it on our own because, hey, we've got everything we need. We're warm, we're safe, we're fed, we're in the womb. And Neptune has this desire for that too. So it's a dual desire for paradise, heaven, but also at the same time a desire to, return to the safety and security of home, so to speak. Neptune can also give a longing to be saved. You want your hero to come along and rescue you from this, terrible existence. That's a Neptunian longing. But also, if we find that we desire to be the rescuer, we want to be somebody's hero, that's a Neptunian thing as well. So there's often a spiritual connection with Neptune, and I'm sure from what I've just described, you can see connections in religious circles to savior mentality, redeemer qualities, longing for paradise. You can see where Neptune's getting its sort of shadow side of spirituality popping up there in religious, ideology. But Neptune is also in the positive side which I love to talk about more, is the beautiful connection to angelic realms, to the divine. So if we channel higher wisdom, higher knowledge, that's a Neptune thing. If we're channeling creativity, beauty, art, if we're channeling unconditional love. And now I'm talking about channeling here, not in the sort of, some entity speaking through me, although that is a Neptunian thing. I'm talking about simply expressing things that come from beyond us. Beautiful things, gracious things, ethereal things, things that come from beyond the earthly plane. That spiritual side of Neptune is so beautiful. So Neptune is the manifestation of divine love, divine grace, and divine creativity, divine creative ideals. He is connected to visualization, imagination, and even healing through visualization and imagination. The idea that through your thought processes and lifting them to a higher plane, dreaming and aspiring of what it could be, that you can heal yourself. And again, we come back to the miraculous component here, where people are miraculously healed. Neptune has connections to hypnosis as well, and mesmerism. In fact, Mesmer was the man who developed the idea of being hypnotized as a form of healing. So the two are very similar. And so Neptune has connections with this as well. It's all very interesting, but Neptune is actually a planet that it's hard to define him, and I use the word him loosely, as a masculine planet. Now, Neptune as a god was a masculine god, but the expression of Neptune is actually very feminine. It errs on the feminine side. So it would be very interesting to understand exactly how they reached the concept in ancient mythology that Neptune, the god of the oceans, was actually a man. I feel maybe that came about at the time of the ancient Greeks and Romans, when the patriarchy was establishing itself, because really the expression of Neptune is this compassionate, unconditionally loving, highly creative energy, which connects more to the water signs and the watery energy, which is feminine in astrology. So very interesting there. Neptune is a more feminine energy expression. Neptune rules the sign of Pisces in modern astrology, and of course that is a water sign as well. Neptune is also in astrology neither benefic nor malefic. So that means, we don't put a label of good or bad on him. But really with Neptune, it depends what aspects you have to your placement of Neptune in the chart, whether he will manifest his shadow side or whether he will manifest his light side in your life. And we've kind of talked a little bit about both here now. I will talk further about the shadow side in just a second. But if you have mostly good aspects, like a conjunction, we can classify that as a good aspect, or perhaps a trine or a sextile to Neptune from other planets, then it's looking good for you. Neptune will tend to express in its more angelic form. It's more miraculous, blessed form. But if you have quite a mixed bag, maybe you've got some squares to your Neptune, maybe you've got some oppositions to your Neptune. If that's what it's looking like, then you may end up with a bit more of the shadow side exhibiting in your personality or what you attract in your life. Let's explore what that is all about. Well, some of the shadow side of Neptune is in the desire for utopia. We want to see evil people punished. And you'll see this a lot expressing in religions, where we just want everyone who's bad to go to hell. And that's actually a shadow Neptunian energy, because we want to preserve utopia for the pure, and everyone else can suffer, So that's a shadow side expression of Neptune. Narcissism can be connected with Neptune's shadow side as well. And so can masochism, actually. If we think about this desire to be seen as holy and pure, often that connects to making ourselves falsely humble and lower than another person. And that can incite in another person distaste, and disgust for another person who is falsely humble. And of course, if you're familiar with the idea of masochism, then you know that it's about debasing yourself in order that you might feel more worthy or more holy because you've made yourself lowly. It's a very slippery, shall we say, concept. And again, not everything is as it seems. It might seem with someone who is in a masochist state that they don't care about themselves, that they don't love themselves, that they're being cruel to themselves. But very often under the surface is this energy of wanting, the best way I can describe it, to be pure through making yourself lowly, like the flagellants did in ancient medieval times through whipping themselves. Oh, they're so pure and holy because they're whipping themselves for Christ. It's that kind of idea. Odd one, but not everything is as it seems with Neptune and Neptune's shadow side. Projection is something that is actually a Neptunian behavioral quality coming from this psychological depth. If we have separation anxiety, that's a shadow side of Neptune. Of course it is, because we are longing to return to the womb. And when we're separate from that safe space, separation anxiety. So if you're looking at those psychological issues in a chart and, assessing that, look at Neptune and what Neptune's doing in the chart. Shadow side of Neptune can be idealization, where we don't see a person clearly for who they are, but we put them on a pedestal. So celebrity culture would be one expression of that. Anyone we put on a pedestal and hold up there, and we create an illusion around that person. It's not the truth. It's not real. It's not what is really going on at the core of a person, to have them up on a pedestal and think that, oh my God, they're so perfect. That's idealization, and that's Neptune shadow side, as is hysteria, as is addiction. Addiction's another expression here. And why? Because addiction is escapism. If we're addicted to drugs, usually with Neptune involved, it's because we want to get away from the harshness of reality. If we're addicted to alcohol, again, it's an escape mechanism and it's an escape valve, but not a healthy one, because reality is too harsh and we just long to get out of here. Obviously, deception is a shadow side of Neptune, because if you're creating an illusion, while there can be sort of times when that's good, as in the case of glamour and that's fun and what have you, sometimes when we are creating an illusion, we're deceiving others. We're pulling the wool over their eyes. We're not being our true self, and that is a shadow Neptune expression. Sacrifice, I would say, is a shadow Neptunian expression. Again, it comes in close context with this false humility kind of behavior. If we feel that we have to sacrifice ourselves for another person, then we're kind of making ourselves to be better than the other person. I'll go in, I'll sacrifice myself, and then that person will be saved. And there's a false humility about it, a deceptive humility that goes along with that. And of course, oftentimes when people have strong Neptune representations in the chart, they lose themselves, they martyr themselves for the sake of another. Does that benefit their life? No, usually. But it might make them feel spiritually greater, or that they have been a noble person. Again, we've got this sacrifice energy that's a bit not what it seems, and this is also the shadow side of Neptune. Victimization. Victimization is another Neptunian energy, where poor me, I am suffering because life has been unkind, and therefore I am longing to get away from life, and return to the womb or go to paradise because I have been victimized. Instead of being our own savior, instead of making the best of things and doing what we can to transform our karma, no, we're a victim and we just want to escape. That's so Neptunian shadow side. Especially, you could call it suffering that's seen as purity. So these are some of the Neptunian shadow energies. I don't want to leave it on that though. There are good things, obviously, that Neptune correlates to. We've talked about some of these, but, others might be the belief that there's enough for everybody, and that the universe can be kind and the universe has our back. In fact, transcendence of matter is a very big Neptunian theme. The belief that eventually good will win over evil. That's Neptunian as well. Jesus' teachings were very Neptunian. He was, after all, the avatar for the age of Pisces, which was ruled by Neptune. So compassion, unconditional love. We've talked about that. Forgiveness, healing, all these things, divine healing, miraculous healing. These are Neptunian ruled things. So Jesus was a big representation of Neptune energy in the positive. The most creative and artistic planet, we've already talked about that. And it's actually at its strongest capacity in water signs. So Neptune does very well in Pisces, Cancer, or Scorpio. She will tend to give the best results if that's where he is in your natal chart, but also if that's where he's transiting at any given time, he's going to give the better side of himself to you. Neptune rules the color light blue. Hence, I have my blue blouse on here today for this video, but I've also worn my very well, you might not be able to see it because the color in this camera doesn't actually come up that good. I need to get a new camera, but it's actually a very beautiful velvet jacket that's ocean color, like the kind of tranquil turquoise that we see up on the beaches of Queensland or some beautiful tropical beaches. And I thought, seeing as Neptune rules these gorgeous oceans, I would wear my beautiful aqua turquoise color velvet jacket with my light blue Neptunian top. Neptune can also have connections to lavender, purpley colors also. Hence, we see often people who work in spiritual, sort of new agey fields have a lot of purple going on, because often they might not be aware of this even, but they're probably highly Neptunian people. They have a strong Neptune in their chart, and so the purple element tends to come through quite a lot, and you'll see a lot of, websites and stuff with purple this and lavender that on many spiritual sites. Neptune rules the gemstone amethyst as well, and so amethyst has a lot of qualities to it that correlate very strongly to Neptune. Some tangible things, and I did say in the beginning Neptune's more psychological. Yep, that's true, very true, but Neptune does have some governance of certain items on the planet, namely because of what was happening at the time Neptune was discovered, what things were starting to be used and utilized when Neptune was discovered, and therefore Neptune gets the rulership of those things. So the ocean, obviously, but oils, plastics, impressionism, film, photography, advertising, poisons, escapism, that's not actually a tangible thing, but that's obviously something Neptune rules, drugs. As I've already illustrated, a lot of these things were being discovered. Film, photography, medications, the shipping industry, steam-powered ships were really starting to get a Guernsey around the time that Neptune came along. So shipping and the oceans, all of these things, highly Neptunian. Now, in my level 1 astrology course that is coming out, you can learn more about Neptune and the things Neptune rules, and we go into greater depth with Neptune there and its rulerships. So if you're interested in knowing more, check out that course. But what does Neptune want? It wants unwavering trust, unwavering love, an unwavering belief that the divine will come through for you. Even in the face of no evidence at all, Neptune wants us to believe. If you are 40 odd years old and you've never had a boyfriend, Neptune is saying, keep believing and the miracle can happen. And I would encourage you, if that's the case, well, wait till you're 42. Who knows? Neptune, when it reaches its maturation at 42, may just bring you what you've been waiting for. So that's a short look at the beautiful and quite intriguing and unusual planet of Neptune. Now let's have a look at what Neptune is all about when he travels through a house in the horoscope and what he's going to do for you while he's there. So how do we find out if Neptune is transiting through our 10th house or not? Well, the first thing we need to do is go to an app like planetwatcher.com and find out what sign Neptune is currently transiting through. And you will look for the little glyph of Neptune that looks like a little trident and see what sign that it's in. And that's going to be the first step to determining what house Neptune is transiting in your chart. The next thing you're going to need to know is, what is your rising sign? And to have Neptune transiting through the 10th house, we're going to use the example of Neptune in Pisces here. We need for there to be 10 houses between our rising sign and the placement of when Neptune currently is transiting. Now, in this example, using Pisces, this is going to mean that Gemini will be the rising sign. If you're a Gemini rising person and Neptune is transiting through the sign of Pisces, then this is for you. Let's show. Gemini rising. Let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 houses in whole sign astrology puts Neptune obviously in the 10th house. So I hope that makes sense to people. If you are not experiencing Neptune transiting the 10th house, then figure out where it is for you and go to that video. So Neptune's going to be in the 10th house by transit for roughly 14 years, because Neptune takes 14 years to move through a sign. This is also an angular house. When a planet is transiting an angular house, it is more impactful, and it will tend to impact us by causing us to become more Neptunian in our expression in the world. So if you're having any planet, particularly the outer planets, transiting an angular house, the 1st house, 10th house, 7th house, or 4th house, you're likely to find that you're going to express more qualities of that particular planet than you usually would. And so Neptune is no exception. We become more romantic, more dreamy, more idealistic, more devoted. We can also be more gullible. We can also be more sensitive. We can also be a bit more vulnerable as well, which is the shadow expressions of Neptune. So be conscious that you as a person will be starting to exhibit more of these qualities than ordinarily. But the 10th house is a house of our social reputation. It's the house of worldly achievements, our career, authority figures, and it's the house of how we need to present ourselves in life in order to succeed. It's also the house of our legacy, what we leave for people who come after us. So let's explore those things in relation to Neptune. Well, worldly achievement. You might find with a Neptune transit through the 10th house that you start to give up positions of rank and authority and sort of height in the world in order that you should go and contribute to the greater good of humanity. So, you might over time, and remember Neptune is an infiltrating influence like a fog rather than firecrackers. So Neptune will slowly over time cause you to become maybe disillusioned with a position of social rank. Maybe you've been CEO of some big company for years, and slowly it erodes away your feeling of value in that position, and you decide, you know what, I'm going to go and head up a not-for-profit organization, or I'm going to go and start a charity now. And so you move into something that is far more concerned with the benefit of the whole and the benefit of humanity rather than your own ego. So personal goals tend to diminish a little, and universal goals of oneness replace them. How can I help? How can I contribute to my community, to the world, to humanity, which is a lovely thing. Just one word of warning, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and end up living on the streets because you've given up a high profile position and can no longer support you or your family's lifestyle. So be conscious and aware, which is sometimes hard to do where Neptune's concerned. Your career motivation can be transformed, but it will happen very subtly, like a fog, like I said, and the reasons you get out of bed in the morning to do what you do may change significantly. In fact, the way that you feel about your work and career at the beginning of Neptune's transit through the 10th house will be completely different by the time Neptune finishes transiting the 10th house. We kind of move beyond our personal agenda for worldly success, and I've kind of illustrated this a bit already, but our own desire for, look at me, here I am, let me shine, kind of dissolves away, and we become more concerned with how can I step up and be present and seen in the world in a way that's going to help and heal and make the world a better place. So it's a lovely position actually. You will, and I have Neptune natally in the 10th house actually, and I find this is very, very true for me natally as well. We long for meaning in our work. For years, I'll give you an illustration, I was a town planner. I did some fabulous things. I worked as a placemaker, which is sort of to do with place branding and revitalization of areas that had become lackluster or were dead. That was fun, and that there was purpose and meaning in that. But I also spent a bit of time as a town planner just ticking boxes and approving developments that were really going to make the world worse, not better. but they met all the legal requirements and the parameters of the rules and regulations that I was working with, and I had no reason to not approve what some people wanted to do, create ugliness and tiny little houses that need I go on. But so I became disillusioned, Neptune in the 10th house natally, very disillusioned with what I was doing because I couldn't see the meaning or the purpose, and it wasn't creating a better world. It wasn't living up to some idealization that I had for substance in life through what I did out there in the world in my career. And so I gradually left that and decided I could no longer do that. And fortunately, the universe came in and supported me with providing me the career that I now have, which is helping and blessing people and hopefully giving some spiritual insight to people through the language of the heavens. So back to the point I was making here, Neptune transiting the 10th house will give you a longing for meaning and substance in your career and your worldly endeavors that might see you change jobs, not unexpectedly, but over the 14-year period. Now, I've got to say, it's also quite a difficult transit. And this is because the 10th house has connections to Saturn, and Neptune and Saturn are like oil and water. The 10th house, like Saturn, is very material, very worldly, very earth-oriented, and Neptune's the opposite of that. It's an ethereal influence. It is like that unconditional love, that heightened divine quality. And so, of course, there is this misalignment, like oil and water, between the purpose of the 10th house and the purpose of Neptune. But if you can manage to gel the two, like have a successful worldly career and aspirations and goals, and bring it in with some sort of meaning and substance and purpose that serves the greater good, then you're on a winner. Do be careful of loss of logic and loss of good judgment regarding career. You may, shadow side of this, and there's shadow in everything, remember. Shadow side of this placement might mean that you give up a fabulous job. You take a much lesser paying and less, ultimately in the long term, less satisfying position under the illusion that it's going to be more spiritually worthwhile for you, and you may regret it down the track. So, seek advice if you're looking at career change from people who are not going through this transit, who are not going to be sort of lost in the fog or confused about things, or running the gauntlet of being deceived through a transit like Neptune through the 10th house, particularly if you have hard aspects to your natal Neptune. Be aware of that. And you can feel confused or disoriented, as I already just mentioned. Like this is coming from a fear that you'll miss your mission, you'll miss your purpose, and if I take this step, what if I stuff it up? What if I fail? What if I can't support my family, but I'm going to be doing some spiritual good in the world, but hey, I'm not going to be able to put food on the table, but and there's confusion, and there's a sort of a push-pull, a tug of war going on within you that can happen, and feeling like disoriented and fearful about career and worldly achievements. That's the shadow side here. Now, the 10th house is also authority figures and father figures as well. And in the shadow, while we're on that shadow side of Neptune, we'll mention that deception by bosses, deception by authority figures is entirely possible. That can happen. This Neptune rules gossip, and you might find that authority figures are gossiping about you, for better or worse. Sometimes gossip is good, sometimes we want people to talk about us for all the right reasons, perhaps. But just know that authority figures might be talking about you at certain points during this transit for 14 years. And being the house of the father, it has been seen that father figures during this transit may become a bit distant or emotionally withdrawn. Sometimes fathers may leave, if you're a child, it's particularly traumatic if you're going through this transit, because your father might actually, go to another country or be away a lot or just not engage with you. And so if you have a child who's going through Neptune in the 10th house transit, be very conscious, be very aware to engage, to love, to sort of connect with that child as much as possible, because it can be psychologically upsetting and disturbing if you've got a young child and you're having this transit. In the positive, a father figure in your life under this transit might start to get involved with spiritual activities or creative endeavors. They might go for holidays to foreign places perhaps. So they might start to embrace the sort of the higher manifestation of Neptune. There's also the possibility that a father figure may embrace the shadow side of Neptune, which is to get involved with alcoholism or drug addiction, maybe addiction to anything really, like addicted to, KFC, like anything is possible. But Neptune can see people become a bit addicted, might join a cult, might become fanatical or zealous about certain beliefs or something like that. So yeah, father figures can go through a bit of upheaval with Neptune in the 10th house. Now, with your career, let's move to that topic. We've looked at your worldly achievements, which has to do with career, of course, but it's not always associated with what we're making money with. But career, if you're involved in a career that has no meaning and has no substance and is just a bit of a drudgery, but it's mundane and you're getting the bills paid and what have you, or if you're in a career that you're just not suited to and you're uncomfortable and you're unhappy, it's likely to dissolve at some point in this 14-year transit. Now, if you don't change careers and you're in that situation of feeling disgruntled with a career and you don't change, you'll become frustrated, discouraged and depressed under this transit, because Neptune is wanting to pull you into something new. And it'll do it slowly and subtly. It's not the kind of planet that wants to drag you kicking and screaming, but it will make you feel uncomfortable and depressed and sad or whatever until you actually start to make the changes needed that align more with spirituality and purpose in your life. If you don't follow your heart, you might be forced to resign or retire when you don't want to. So that's another thing that can happen with this transit. It's a time for acting upon your ideals and your visions. So if you've always longed to have that, Neptune is connected to farming. If you've always longed to have a self-sufficient farm, growing your own veggies, having your own chooks and what have you, and living a life that's more self-sufficient, then maybe under this transit you need to actually start putting actions in place to achieve that. Get those chooks in the backyard. Look for properties to purchase that are going to allow you to have that self-sufficient lifestyle. Perhaps look for ways to act upon your ideals and your visions. If you are in a career that has to do with Neptunian themes, maybe you're in a career that's about healing, astrology, metaphysics, doctors, nurses, perhaps not nurses, more doctors are Neptunian, or a chemist. Maybe you are working with oils or the oceans in some way. Maybe you're an artist. Maybe you're in film or photography. Maybe you're working for a charity organization in some way. Maybe you're involved in spiritualism or regression work or hypnosis, all these Neptunian things. If that's the case, then you could succeed way beyond your expectations at some point during this 14-year transit, because Neptune brings magic and magical events. And if you're in that Neptunian realm already with your career, then you're going to scale the heights. And slowly but surely, as Neptune does things infiltratingly, you will attain greater success over this 14-year period in your Neptunian occupation. But if you want success, then you have to do things with a Neptunian approach now. If you want worldly success, you have to let go and let God. You have to trust. You have to, leave things to fate. Neptune is a very fate-oriented planet. So if a door opens and you feel yourself being pushed through that door, go with it. Trust the fate, trust the divine, trust God, and you will succeed better than if you resist. Letting go and letting God is the way to work with Neptune in the 10th. And also acting by faith, I will add as well to that. Sometimes practical considerations take a bit of a back seat under this transit, but acting by faith, taking a leap, is actually supported with Neptune here. So I would never advise anyone to chuck in there a day job and just, go start some new venture. Let's use our wisdom. Let's not sort of be deceived here. If you want to start a charity, if you want to go work for a not-for-profit, or if you want to start being an artist and making a living from being an artist, then do so with wisdom. Remember, Neptune is infiltrating, not sudden, jerky, knee-jerk reactions to things. If you want to be an artist, for example, start doing it on the side while you're keeping your day job. Start creating a website, start producing, artworks or calendars or coloring books or whatever your art entails. Start finding ways to make a living and utilizing your art to bring success to you, but on the side, and gradually, slowly, infiltratingly, as is the nature of Neptune, you will reach a point over the 14-year period where you can actually let go of your day job and focus on the career that has meaning and substance for you. But it requires an act of faith, believing I can eventually, in time, have a career as an artist, or whatever Neptunian occupation it happens to be. Act on your faith with wisdom and caution. Now, finally, the 10th house is our reputation. And I've already mentioned gossip being connected to Neptune. So people will be talking about you. This is the sphere of how we present ourselves to the world, and how the world out there at large perceives us, and people might gossip about you. Neptune in the 10th house. In the shadow side, people might lie about you. That's one of the shadow expressions of Neptune, to lie, to deceive, to pull the wool over people's eyes about who you are. So I've got Neptune in the 10th house. I'm very lucky I don't have any hard aspects to my Neptune. But I know that there's been a lot of gossip about me over the years for certain things, and it hasn't always been easy to bear. Just know if you're having a Neptune transit to the 10th house, there might be those circumstances that arise for you as well. Equally though, you might be talked about for all the right reasons. Somebody's gossiping about you because, oh my gosh, I had a really great astrology reading with her. She was fantastic. Or, that's what I hope people are saying. But, people might be talking about you, spreading the word about you for everything that is good. So can be shadow, can be light here. Now, scandals are also possible because this is the house of the public and how the world perceives you, as I said. And Neptune is connected to scandals. So with Neptune transiting through this area of the chart, something might happen in your life that is something of a scandal. Not saying you're going to do the wrong thing or that you'll be raked over the coals. Sometimes scandals happen when, we don't even seek them out. And, maybe you get divorced and everybody's talking about what happened, or it's scandalous, or, something like that. Maybe, and I'm using the illustration of divorce, maybe that's a good thing and you need to be free from a marriage. This is not a transit for divorce. I'm using this as an illustration of scandal. But maybe you needed to be free from that situation, and so you got divorced and it was a relief. Not a bad thing, but still the world might perceive it as something scandalous that happened. Remember, I'm not just talking about divorce. It could be any particular incident that's a scandal. Another thing, because this is the house of public perception, and with Neptune here, people might start to perceive you as being very glamorous, which is a Neptunian quality, very mysterious, very ethereal and sort of fantasy-like. They might see you through the lens of, like a fantasy, persona. They won't perhaps see you clearly as, a down-to-earth, ordinary human being, but they might perceive you as someone maybe a bit elfin-like or fairy tale-like, somebody glamorous. So the world might start to perceive you in that way as well. And finally, for some people who have a natal chart that is geared towards this, they might experience fame that comes with this transit. Infiltratingly placed in a high position in the world, fame, success, usually for a Neptunian thing, like, singing or music or film, maybe something metaphysical or astrological, or, famous channeler or something. So some Neptunian practice might see you rise into a position of fame if your chart is aligned for you to do so natally. So that's Neptune through the 10th. I hope that's given you some clarity about this particular transit. Join me next week when we check out Neptune through the 11th house.